Hello and welcome back to another video. I'm Zelp, and today we are going to explore corrosive projection and answering questions like when you should use it, when you shouldn't use it. There will be a second part to this video, which is for tomorrow, where we get a little bit more nerdy and we're gonna look more on the numbers. I kind of have it planned out in my head. I don't really know if I can make it happen yet. But in today's video, we are going to cover our foundations. We are going to learn how corrosive projection applies in game, and also some of the damage auras, for example, steel charge, pistol M, those kind of things, how they actually work and which multiplier do they belong to. So very quickly, if you come over here, you can see that I have my corrosive projection on, and it has been nerfed. It now only reduces 18% of enemies' armor. Unlike before, where you can actually rock 4 corrosive projection and have the enemy's armor completely removed. Now, because of the value going down, you can no longer do that, even with coaction drift. And we're going to talk about that in just a bit. Is it called coaction drift? Yes, it is. Okay. So the first thing that we want to test is how it affects the enemy. Now, we have played this card before, where we summon a Grineer, and we're going to use a Irate Heavy Gunner at level 60, because at level 60, if you guys missed the previous video that I made talking about its armor, it has 3017 armor. So right now, if I do not do anything without even hitting him, if I were to use my Polarize and find out how much armor he has left, for example right now, so 1292 and another one 1182, if I add them up together, you should get 2474. Now if you take 2474 divided by 3017, you actually get a ratio, and that if you take it and times 100%, you can actually see that the remaining armor that we just stripped with Polarize is about 82%, which means that the aura did actually remove about 18% of its armor. So now what we're going to do is we're going to add coaction drift into the equation. I actually made a separate video for this in the past, which I don't even remember what's the results, so I'm going to test it again. So we have a new Irate Heavy Gunner. Again, I'm not going to do anything to it besides using Polarize and get the numbers. So here we go. First one, 1292. Second one is 1100. So if I plug in the numbers, 1292 plus 1100, we'll have 2392. If you take 2392 divided by 3017 and then times 100%, you can see that we actually remove about 79.3% of its armor, which means that with coaction drift and corrosive projection, we actually have removed about 20.7% armor. So if you want to know how it stacks, if you think about it, 18%, if you increase 18% by 15%, that will mean that it's like 18 times 1.15, and that will actually give you 20.7%. So that is what's happening. It actually increases the power strength of your corrosive projection by 15%. Now here comes the next part. We want to find out, where does this reduction, this armor reduction, belong to? Does it belong to certain multipliers, or is it something that's its own? So what we're going to do is we're going to use whatever that we can think of. Corrosive and also heat. I'm not too sure if there's anything else that I could add into the equation, but so heat removes about 50% of the armor, and then corrosive can remove up to 80% of the armor. So what we're going to do is we are going to have our corrosive projection. We're actually going to remove coaction drift for this. We're going to use that pure 18% because I don't really want to deal with the decimals. And then we're going to see how much does it actually reduce. Now we have already calculated in the past video how corrosive actually works with heat, and they are two separate multipliers. Now when you're trying to remove things like armor, it's very different from trying to buff up your damage. If you're trying to buff up your damage, the more different multipliers that you can add into, the better it is. It gets a lot stronger. For example, if you do 100 damage and you increase it by 50%, that is 150. If you increase by another 50%, which is a separate multiplier, then you actually increase 50% out of 150, which is 75. In things like reduction, like you're trying to get it to 0, then being in a separate multiplier is actually worse in some ways. Now, for example, if you have 100 armor and I reduce that by 50%, you have 50 armor left. If I reduce that by another 50%, then you have a 25 armor left. If I keep reducing over and over again, you'll find that it's mathematically impossible to get to 0. But the game does round it up or round it down at a certain point, you know, below 0.5 or something. So it is possible to get to 0 in the game, but it just takes a lot of procs if it's a separate multiplier. However, if let's say again you start with 100 armor and you remove it by 50%, if I add another 50% that is additive, that is not a different multiplier, then straight away I'm actually removing 100%. So in that sense, you actually want to hope that corrosive projection actually belongs to one of another multiplier for armor reduction and not a separate multiplier, unlike when you were trying to buff up your damage. Okay, so let's get a fresh raid heavy gunner, and what we're gonna do is we are going to shoot it multiple times, and then we want to make sure that there is a maxed out corrosive proc and also heat proc, and then we are going to use our polarize and see how much armor does it have left. There you go, maxed out. Okay, we also have maxed out heat, 247. So at the end, even everything is maxed out, it still have 247 armor. So 247 is just 8.2% of its entire armor. This means with the 80% armor reduction from corrosive status and another 50% that is from heat, that adds up to about 90% armor reduction. That remaining 10% is being reduced by 18%. In other words, with just corrosive proc and heat, you actually remove 90% of the enemy's armor, but if you add a corrosive projection, you now remove about 91.2% armor. So yeah, basically that minus 18% armor reduction from corrosive projection only contributed about 1.8%. So from this, we know that it belongs in a separate multiplier from the heat armor reduction and also the corrosive proc armor reduction. Now, however, this does not mean that it's completely trash. It doesn't mean that it's really bad, because if you think back at it, the corrosive proc does 80% armor reduction and heat is supposedly doing 50%. But when you put them together, and if let's say corrosive proc were to be taken into account first, then you'll see that your heat armor reduction is only about 10% out of the entire thing. Because with only corrosive is 80% plus heat, you only get up to 90%. So in a weird way, corrosive projection is not really that bad. It's just that it's really bad in this situation where we have a lot better armor reduction ways or methods. Now, another thing to note is that this one is AoE, it's an aura, so it applies to all the enemies, and you can also stack them up with multiple players. In case you guys do not realize, viral is getting really popular. In a way, if you want to rock a viral build that has nothing to do with armor reduction, then having corrosive projection is going to help you a lot. So I guess a vague guide would be if you are going for a heavy armor reduction build on your weapon, you don't need or probably do not want to have corrosive projection for your aura. However, if you are not and you are fighting against armored enemies, then you probably want to go with corrosive projection. Now, another thing that I want to talk about is these damage auras like pistol amp, rifle amp, or even like steel charge. I feel like a lot of people would rock steel charge because of how much more capacity it gives you. But we are going to test it with pistol amp because of the pistol that I'll be using that has mainly impact damage, and it's going to help us understand how the damage multiplier is going to work. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this is because if you're not going for corrosive projection, a lot of people would go for these damage mods. However, again, it's really based on what you're rocking. Sometimes if you're using a very spammable Warframe, you might want to go for energy siphon or something else. So for the second part of this video, I just want to show you guys which damage multiplier does these aura belong to, and then after that, maybe in tomorrow's video, we are actually going to do a full-on comparison when you should use corrosive projection and when you should use something like pistol amp. And I think that's going to be very interesting. But first, we need to understand some of the basics of these mods. So to test where does this damage multiplier from pistol amp belong to, I'm going to use this pistol, which is called the Cyanex, and we're going to use the Auger Impact that gives 90% damage. I'm not going to use Haunted Strike because it's too much. It's going to overshadow and make the aura that we have only giving like 27% really insignificant, and it's going to be harder to tell the difference. One thing really cool is that we don't really need to use it to attack any enemies. We can actually see it from here. This is something that I realized that they updated that I did not know happened, is that over here you can see this number. This number is after the aura has been applied and also after the mods that you have here on the weapon being applied. So if I remove this entire thing actually goes down. If I were to remove the aura, then you can actually come back here and you can see that it goes down to 50. Now originally it was 108. So all we need to do is work backwards and see if it makes sense. So from 50, if we were to times the aura, which is 27%, so we times by 1.27, and then you can see that it went up to 63.5, which makes sense. And then after that, if we were to put our, what is it called again, Auger Impact, that gives you 90%. So if we were to times this 63.5 by 1.9, you will actually get 120. But we did not see 120. In fact, originally it was 108. So it doesn't belong in a separate multiplier. So let's just double check by adding them up together. So this is 90, the aura is 27, so together you get 117%. So if you take 50 and you times 2.17, which is an increment of 117%, and you'll see that you get 108.5 damage, which then makes or tally with what we see. So just like that, you can see that the aura has its damage multiplier belonging to the Auger Impact. So they are of the same multiplier, which means that when you have them together, you add them up instead of multiplying them again. Now this is also the reason why when I made my Mesa video a long time ago, that I actually say that do not put Haunted Strike if you are rocking the Peacemaker ability. And I feel like this is one of those things that to those that do not understand the multipliers, they will feel like it's really silly because Haunted Strike gives you 220% damage, which feels so stupid not to have on. But technically, if you calculate the damage with this and with all the power strength that I have on, it just doesn't make sense to put this in. It's better off putting something of a different multiplier. Now just to double confirm, let's add a elemental multiplier. So this belongs to a different damage multiplier. So from here we add heat charge, which is an increment of 45 damage because it's 90% of 50 damage, its base. And then we have a total of 95. Now if I were to put in the pistol amp, which is right over here, okay. So I should see that it increased by another fold of 27. So there you go, you actually can see it over here, it increased up to almost 120 instead of 108. So before we were using, where is it? There you go, Auger Impact that increases by 90%. This one also increases by 90. But because they stack differently, you can see that the total damage coming out is different. If I were to put this one in, it's only 108. If I were to put this one in, although they both give extra 90%, but because they are different multiplier, this one is actually better. Okay, I really hope that you guys got that, because in the next video it's going to get very nerdy and there will be a lot of numbers. But I feel like if I successfully finish that video by tomorrow, and after watching that video, you're gonna get a sense of relief to know like in what situation should you use corrosive projection, and in what situation it's better to just go for the damage auras instead. So that is what we'll be exploring. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Bye bye.